In this video, we will walk you through the Lync Server 2010 Control Panel Management Interface, showing you the initial steps for deploying enterprise voice, including configuring media bypass to a trunk and defining translation rules. After viewing this video, be sure to continue on to Deploying Enterprise Voice Part 2, Dial Plans, Normalization Rules, and Voice Policies to become familiar with the remaining steps required for deploying enterprise voice. Please note you cannot deploy enterprise voice components until you have deployed Microsoft Lync Server 2010 Enterprise or Standard Edition in your network. To support the features of the enterprise voice workload and dial-in conferencing, you must deploy at least one mediation server. For our deployment scenario, we will assume that you have already defined your front-end pool, co-locating the mediation server, and have defined the trunk peer of the mediation server, which can be a PSTN gateway, ITSP, or IPPBX. If you need help deploying a front-end pool, view the Create Your First Pool video on TechNet before continuing on. From the Start menu, go to All Programs and launch the Lync Server Control Panel. To begin the enterprise voice deployment, we will enable Media Bypass, configuring it on a trunk. Media Bypass allows media traffic to bypass the mediation server and flow directly from the client to the PSTN gateway, IPPBX, or SIP trunk provider. Confirm that your qualified SIP trunk provider is able to support Media Bypass and ensure you're logged onto the computer as a member of the RTC Universal Server Admins group. The Control Panel UI provides left navigation and top navigation tabs, divided by the main workloads and configuration options. We will work primarily with the voice routing and voice feature sections for our deployment. From the left navigation bar, click Voice Routing and then the Trunk Configuration tab. You can edit an existing trunk or create a new trunk. We will edit the existing global trunk and start by double-clicking. The name field will pre-populate with the trunk's associated site or service name. Next, select the maximum number of early dialogues a PSTN gateway or ISP session border controller can support. We will keep the default value. For encryption support level, choose if you will support Secure Real-Time Transfer Protocol or SRTP. We will keep the default value to help protect traffic between the mediation server and the gateway or PBX. If unsure as to whether or not your service provider can support SRTP, select Optional, and SRTP will be initiated automatically if the service provider supports it. Next, ensure media will bypass the mediation server for processing by the trunk peer. Select the Centralized Media Processing checkbox if you have a well-known media termination point, meaning call signaling and media will follow the same path to one IP address, such as that of a PSTN gateway. If your IPPBX does not have a media termination point associated with the trunk you are configuring, and media is flowing to any number of endpoints, you can clear this checkbox. We will keep all default selections. You now need to associate and configure translation rules for the trunk. We will create a new rule. Enterprise voice requires that all dial strings be normalized to E164 format for the purpose of performing reverse number lookup. Also, the trunk peer may require that numbers be in a local dialing format. To perform outbound route translation, you can write regular expressions manually, or you can utilize the Build a Translation Rule tool. We will configure translation rules using this tool, which generates the matching pattern and translation rule based off the values we enter, such as starting digits, number length, digits to remove, and digits to add. We will create a rule for U.S. international long-distance dialing. Enter a name. Add a description. We'll select the leading digits we want the pattern to match. In our case, plus, as E164 numbers start with plus. Next, specify the number of digits in the matching pattern. From the drop-down, select whether you want the pattern to match numbers this length exactly, at least this length, or any length. We will select at least this length. We will now select the number of starting digits to be removed, which in this case will be 1. This indicates the plus will be removed from the beginning of the number. Lastly, we will specify digits to be added to the beginning of the translated numbers, in this case 011. The tool now generates a matching pattern and translation rule. Click OK to save the translation rule and OK again to save the trunk configuration. To publish the configuration change, from the trunk configuration page click Commit and then Commit All. After you have enabled media bypass for individual trunk connections to appear, you must also enable media bypass globally. To do so, go to the Network Configuration tab. We'll enable media to always bypass the mediation server and click Commit. You now know how to enable and configure media bypass on a trunk and build associated translation rules. Continue on to the second video, Deploying Enterprise Voice Part 2, Dial Plans, Normalization Rules, and Voice Policies, to walk through the remaining steps for deploying enterprise voice. For additional deployment guidance, visit www.microsoft.com/technet to view Lync Server 2010 deployment documentation.